Welcome back to Boss Economics World, folks. The channel where we peel back the curtain on the clown show that is modern economic policy, exposing the governmental buffoonery that's tanking your wallets, your jobs, and your future. I'm your host, the one and only Dr. Boss, here to serve up some piping hot economic truth bombs with a side of righteous outrage. Buckle up, because today we're diving headfirst into the Eurozone's latest economic dumpster fire, a toxic cocktail of tariffs, inflation flops, and ECB rate cuts that smell like desperation from a mile away. And guess what? It's your hard-earned money on the line, thanks to the geniuses running the show. Now, let's talk about the latest scandal rocking the Eurozone, courtesy of a Bloomberg survey that's got the European Central Bank, ECB, sweating bullets. Inflation in the euro area? Slower than a snail on a treadmill, folks. Analysts are now predicting consumer price growth at a measly 1.9% in 2026 and 2% in 2027, down 0.1 percentage points from earlier forecasts. Economic growth? A pathetic 0.8% in 2025, barely enough to keep the lights on. And who do we have to thank for this economic misery? Oh, just the brilliant minds in government and central banking, fumbling the ball like a bunch of amateurs at a pickup game. Let's start with the elephant in the room, Donald Trump's tariff tantrum. This guy's out here slapping 145% levies on China and 10% duties on everyone else, including the EU, like he's playing a real-life game of Monopoly. Sure, he's paused the hikes for 90 days to negotiate, but let's not kid ourselves, this is a full-on economic wrecking ball, and the Eurozone's taking the hit square in the face. Investors are freaking out, stock markets are tanking, and the euro's shooting up to a 3-year high, making imports cheaper and inflation even harder to ignite. And what's the ECB's genius response? Oh, let's just cut interest rates for the 7th time this week. Because nothing screams economic leadership like slashing rates into oblivion while the house burns down around you. Now, let's break this down for the regular folks out there, those of you who aren't sipping lattes in Frankfurt's ECB tower. Tariffs are essentially taxes on imports, which means higher costs for businesses, higher prices for consumers, and a big fat drag on economic growth. According to the OECD, a full-blown escalation of Trump's tariffs could shave off 1.2% of global GDP by 2026. That's right, folks, your governments are playing tariff roulette, and you're the one losing your shirt. And here's the kicker, the EU, in its infinite wisdom, has decided not to retaliate with drastic countermeasures. Why? Because they're terrified of fanning inflation. So instead, they're just sitting there, taking the punches, while the ECB scrambles to paper over the cracks with more rate cuts. Brilliant. Now, let's talk about the ECB's favorite drug, interest rate cuts. According to Bloomberg, economists are betting on not 1, not 2, but 3 more rate cuts by June 2025, bringing the deposit rate down to a measly 2%. Why? Because apparently, the only tool in the ECB's toolbox is a sledgehammer labeled cheap money. Never mind that ultra-low rates have already fueled asset bubbles, crushed savers, and done squat to fix the Eurozone's structural problems. Nope, let's just double down on the insanity and hope for a miracle. Here's the deal, folks, cutting rates might sound like a sweet deal for borrowers, but it's a disaster for everyone else. Savers, pensioners, and anyone trying to earn a decent return on their money are getting crushed. According to the European Banking Federation, net interest margins for Eurozone banks have been squeezed to historic lows, down to 1.3% in 2024, thanks to years of negative and near-zero rates. That means banks are less profitable, less willing to lend, and more likely to take risky bets to make up the difference. Sound familiar? Yeah, it's the same recipe that gave us the 2008 financial crisis, but hey, who needs history lessons when you've got Christine Lagarde at the helm, right? And let's not forget the inflation conundrum. The ECB's been trying to hit its magical 2% inflation target for years, but it's like trying to start a fire in a rainstorm. Energy prices are tanking, the euro's soaring, and Trump's tariffs are a negative demand shock, as Dutch central banker Klaas not so eloquently put it. Translation: inflation's dead in the water, and the ECB's response is to cut rates even further, which, surprise, surprise, makes inflation harder to achieve. It's like trying to lose weight by eating more cake. Absolute genius. Now, let's zoom out from the ECB circus and look at the bigger picture, government mismanagement. Because here's the dirty little secret, folks, central banks like the ECB are just the cleanup crew for the messes created by politicians. Take Germany, the so-called economic powerhouse of Europe. Berlin's been promising much bigger fiscal spending to prop up the economy, but where's the beef? According to the IMF, Germany's fiscal stimulus in 2024 was a measly 0.5% of GDP, compared to the US's 2.3%. That's right, while Uncle Sam's throwing cash around like confetti, Germany's sitting on its hands, terrified of breaking its sacred debt brake. And then they wonder why their economy's growing at a snail's pace. And don't even get me started on the EU as a whole. These guys can't agree on anything, trade policy, fiscal policy, energy policy, you name it. Just look at the EU's response to Trump's tariffs, a big fat nothing burger. According to a 2024 report by Bruegel, the EU's lack of a unified fiscal framework has cost the bloc 1.5% of GDP annually in lost growth since the Eurozone crisis. That's trillions of euros down the drain, folks, all because our fearless leaders can't get their act together. But hey, at least they're great at giving speeches about European solidarity, right? Now, let's talk about the real victims here, not the suits in Frankfurt, not the politicians in Brussels, but you, the hardworking people of the Eurozone. Because while the ECB's busy playing rate cut roulette, the real economy's taking a beating. Unemployment's ticking up. Eurostat pegged the Eurozone jobless rate at 6.7% in Q1 2025, with youth unemployment in countries like Spain and Greece still hovering above 20%. Small businesses getting crushed by higher import costs and weaker demand. And consumers getting squeezed by stagnant wages and rising uncertainty. According to the European Commission's latest Consumer Confidence Index, sentiment in the Eurozone fell to 15.3 in March 2025, the lowest in 2 years. But hey, at least the ECB's got your back with another quarter-point rate cut, right? Wrong. And here's the kicker, folks, this isn't just a short-term problem. The Eurozone's structural issues, low productivity, aging populations, and a chronic lack of investment, are being ignored while governments and central banks play whack-a-mole with tariffs and inflation. According to the World Bank, Eurozone productivity growth has averaged a pathetic 0.7% annually since 2010, compared to 1.5% in the US. That's a recipe for long-term stagnation, folks, and no amount of rate cuts can fix it. But don't expect our leaders to admit that, they're too busy patting themselves on the back for averting a crisis. Newsflash, the crisis is already here, and it's called a lost decade. So, what's the solution, you ask? Well, here's a radical idea. How about our governments and central banks stop treating symptoms and start fixing the actual disease? Step 1, ditch the tariff wars and start negotiating trade deals that actually work for everyone, not just political egos. Step 2, overhaul the ECB's mandate to focus on growth and employment, not just inflation. Step 3, get serious about fiscal policy, invest in infrastructure, education, and green tech, instead of hiding behind austerity dogma. And Step 4, hold our leaders accountable. Because if we don't, folks, we're looking at a future of stagnation, inequality, and economic despair. And trust me, that's not a future you want for your kids. So there you have it, folks, the Eurozone's latest economic train wreck, brought to you by the same clowns who've been running this circus for years. Tariffs, rate cuts, government incompetence, it's the perfect storm of stupidity, and you're the one paying the price. But don't just sit there, share this video, sound off in the comments, and let's send a message to Frankfurt, Brussels, and beyond, we're mad as hell, and we're not gonna take it anymore. Until next time, this is Dr. Boss, signing off. Stay woke, stay broke, and stay tuned to Boss Economics World.